everyone, welcome back to But Why Though, the podcast, and with the new HBO show out, we are covering His Dark Materials. As always, I'm Kate, and I'm here with Adrian.
Hey, how's it going?
And Matt.
Hello.
And we have a super special guest, Aaron.
Hello.
Hi.
So, Aaron, this is your first time guesting on our pod, so why don't you tell the listeners where you're from?
And why you're here.
I am originally from Liverpool, England. Been over here for, 14 years now. See, I was going to go into my whole biography. I had this whole speech lined up.
I mean, if you would like to do that, feel free.
No, another podcast. So I'm from the Ned Social Club podcast. So we've been with you guys 6 months.
Wow, has it been that long?
I think so. I don't know. Time flies. I'm a parent. I just happy I make it one day at a time, to be honest.
I've lost track of these last 4 months. They've just all blurred together.
So what is Nerd Social Club Podcast?
We review the news of the week, and we basically do similar things to what you guys do at But Why Though. We do show reviews, movie reviews, any kind of fan casts, casting news that's gone on. We talk about streaming an awful lot, probably more than we should. Talk about anything Marvel, DC, just get into everything that happens through the week. We just kind of fan out and talk about different theories and all sorts. So we have had a lot of fun with it. It's very down to earth. And I podcast with my co-host, Ped McPartland, who stays up ungodly hours in Liverpool, and I'm in Pennsylvania. So it's two English people in different continents. So it's good fun.
That's really cool. So why are you here to talk about His Dark Materials?
Outside of being British.
Because I've read the books, watched the movie, and watched the very first episode of the show, and I love this series because it's fantastic. It's got so many weird elements to it the further you go on, so it's just something different. It's very, very different to a lot of things that are out there.
Awesome. And that goes perfectly into our question to start off the episode. Do you know what His Dark Materials is?
Absolutely not. I have no idea what I'm doing here, and I don't know anything other than this HBO show popped up now, and Kate's like, we doing an episode, and here comes Aaron. And I'm like, what? We doing crafting? I have no idea. I'm going to learn today.
Just asking he's crafting.
How's he doing on the auction houses? Is his material selling? Does he need to sell out? What is he doing?
Is this a rare material, would you say?
Apparently it's a dark material.
Adrian?
So I didn't know what... So this is one of those situations where everyone is talking about his dark materials during the Game of Thrones thing. And I was like, what is that? That's a stupid title for whatever that is. Is he crafting? And then I saw the trailer with Daphne King, and I was like, oh, it's the polar bear movie from 2000 whatever. And then I learned that this is a whole thing. But I don't know, I guess we'll talk about it later. But I remember the movie. I thought the movie was pretty cool with all the different elements, and then the big polar bear fight and stuff. Would I have seen a second one? Probably. And I don't know why I didn't, but I'm sure we'll find out if it's good or not from book readers. But I thought it was fine.
That's like how you call this the polar bear movie. That's about...
I mean, what? I guess other than Narnia, maybe? Where else do you see giant polar bears fighting stuff in movies?
I don't know.
I think to be fair, if someone had said, hey, have you seen that polar bear movie? I probably would have thought of the Golden Compass.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. I was like, that
kind of
isn't
unique
that
elements.
wrong a descriptor.
I'm pretty sure I have the DVD somewhere, my dad's old collection that he gave me, and I'm pretty sure it just has the big polar bear on the front in armor, and I think that's what got people to pick that movie up.
To be fair, I feel like we all have or know people who have bought in-game bears with armor to ride around in MMOs. So
I have
one. Definitely. Yeah.
Actually, I have two.
Neverwinter, right?
No, I have them in ESO. I have the polar bears.
Yeah, I pulled the bears in WoW, so yeah, definitely.
It's all relevant.
I also crafted very well in a lot of dark materials in ESO.
Oh my god.
He did. And
This is going to be
Neverwinter.
the thread now. This is the theme of the show. Matt
Yeah,
with
but
crafting jokes.
but anyway, like that's my extent. Like I've watched the movie and I know it's like kind of this fantasy kind of thing, which I'm all for. So I think once episodes start building up, we're gonna kind of like binge the new one. Unless like someone tells me that it's like a good week to week show, I'm just gonna binge it all because it is a cool sounding universe. I'm kind of excited to learn more about the backstory and stuff.
I don't do week to week anymore.
To be honest, I'm reviewing his Dark Materials, and that's the only reason why I'm watching it week to week. Because I'm waiting for Watchmen to finish so I can binge it.
Accurate.
Yeah, I'm doing that. With, like all these like new shows everyone's talking about, I'm like, I'm not doing this anymore. I lived through the CW verse. I can't do this. I can't do this anymore. Game of Thrones is over. I don't care.
So since I'm leading this episode and I decided on this episode, you can probably infer that I know what his Dark Materials is. And I know what it is because it got banned in my Catholic school that I went to. The first book. And because it got banned, I really, really wanted to read it. And at that time, my mom like dropped me off at the library while she'd like go run errands. And so I found it in the library and I read the first one. And I was fairly young at that time. And then I read the other ones probably like senior year of high school. I read the first one and then read all of them. So it's been a minute since I've read the stories. But I have a synopsis that I'll get into after we finish the history, just to kind of like let everybody know what's going on. But this is probably one of my favorite fantastical universes, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that Phillip Pullman, who wrote the books, deals a lot in, as much as he deals with fantasy, he also deals with like magical realism, so stuff that is really close to how we know it. He only he shifts it a bit. So that's the really cool element that I really like. But with that, we'll get into the history. So His Dark Materials is the name of an epic trilogy of fantasy novels by Philip Pullman, consisting of The Northern Lights, which was released in 1995, and it was published as The Golden Compass in North America, The Subtle Knife, which was released in 1997, and then The Amber Spyglass, which was released in 2000. It follows the coming of age of two children, Lyra Belacqua and Will Perry, as they wander through a series of parallel universes. His Dark Materials has been marketed to young adults, though Pullman wrote with no target audience in mind. The fantasy elements include witches and armored polar bears, which is probably my favorite thing. And the trilogy also alludes to concepts from physics, philosophy, and theology. It also functions in part as a retelling of John Milton's Paradise Lost, as well as an inversion of it, with Pullman commending humanity for what Milton saw as its most tragic failing, original sin. So do y'all know what Paradise Lost is?
I do not.
It's been a while. At one time I did.
Paradise Lost is an epic. So an epic is just a very, very, very long poem from, I think it's 1600s. And essentially what it is it is an exploration. It's arranged into 12 books, and it is essentially an exploration of Adam and Eve. And it explores original sin, Satan, and the Garden of Eden. And essentially what it does is it's part of this, Dante's Inferno, like that kind of stuff. It's part of this religious fantasy works that get published. So a lot of the times when you are told to read Paradiso or the Divine Comedy in general, so the three books from Dante, you are also paired Paradise Lost because it mirrors that. And so there is this long tradition which is one of the interesting things about the trilogy, in that it's so staunchly against religion, but it inverts one of religion's largest fantastical works. So that's a little very reductionist explanation of what Paradise Lost is.
I can see the connections though as you're going through. I'm like, okay, yeah. So it's hard. So I have to ask, How deep are we going in with spoilers as well?
We're going into spoilers, at least for the books, because adaptations. One, I don't think adaptations are ever like the books, and I do think that we kind of got to go into a little bit of what the books talk about. We can cut them back though if you don't want to. You don't want to go.
Your show, your call. I'm good to dive in.
Okay.
I mean, I've seen the first movie, so I basically know everything about the entire series at this point, right? Giant polar bears. Good. And that's it. That's it.
It gets so much weirder.
It does. It like after that first book, it just full throttle into weird. Like not that the first book isn't weird, but like the last two are like something substantially fantastical and weird. So Pullman also followed the trilogy with 2 shorter books set in the same universe, titled Lyra's Oxford, which came out in 2003, and Once Upon a Time in the North, that came out in 2008. La Belle Sauvage, the first book in the new trilogy, The Book of Dust, was published in October of 2017, and it was followed by The Secret Commonwealth, which was followed in October 2019. So we're not going to cover those books mainly because those are the newer works, and while they're within this world of his Dark Materials, the franchise or the series doesn't really encompass them. So we're only going to focus on the first 3, which are Northern Lights, or The Golden Compass as I read it, The Subtle
Borealis.
Knife, and The Ember Spyglass. What, Matt?
Hmm?
What'd you say?
The Borealis.
The Northern Lights.
Was that
Yeah, that's a thing.
Connections?
Do you know about the polar bears? Is the big-
So, in the first book, we follow 11-year-old Lyra Belacqua, who in Jordan College, Oxford, with her demon Pantamalion, which is Pan for short. It's easier that way. I'm also going to butcher a lot of these names. Let's get that out right there.
Hey, you can fact check it. I'm here.
I'm gonna go up to a name and I'm gonna ask you to pronounce it. We can do
I'm
that.
not gonna. Some of these names are. Even I remember reading these. Like, I'm not gonna. I just don't know how to say that. especially when you get to the polar bears.
And there's a reason for that, which we'll get into, which is actually a really cool reason. Okay. So while they're in Oxford, Lyra and Pan witness the Master, who is in charge of the Jordan College where she's at, attempt to poison Lord Asriel, and Lyra's who is Lyra's rebellious and adventuring uncle. She then warns Asriel, then spies on his lecture about dust, mysterious elementary particles. So in the world of his Dark Materials, dust, I believe, it's like sin essentially, but it only appears around adults, and it's like this really, really cool thing.
I was thinking of dark matter, but that's totally not where we were going, apparently.
So, I mean, you're not. It's weird. So like dusts are like these like metaphysical particles, but because the church plays a huge part in defining what they're called and what they originate from, they say that dust is original sin because it only is around adults, but then that dust is also used to teleport between, or not teleport, but like pass through different dimensions or parallel universes.
The books kind of like make this like parallel, this marriage between like science and religion and science and myth, and it kind of just spins throughout the whole series. So you see it from different elements constantly, which is very cool, the different perspectives of it.
So yeah, then you have Lyra's friend Roger, who is kidnapped by child abductors known as the Gobblers, which all the kids think are these myths, and the parents are like, oh no, they're real. They're not jokes. And after that, Lyra is adopted by a charming socialite named Mrs. Coulter, and the Master secretly entrusts her with an althiometer?
A lithiometer.
A lithiometer. See? It's that British. It's like, say aluminum, Aaron.
Aluminium.
And And this alethiometer is what we know as the golden compass. It's not really a compass, which is why it's not really used anywhere else, because the alethiometer is a gadget that can essentially tell when somebody's telling the truth. Then I guess it's in a way a compass, not really. Anyway.
What's not a compass?
It's a truth compass.
Yeah, always points to truth. But it's weird.
So is this like Pirates of the Caribbean, where the compass goes to where your heart desires?
No.
Oh.
It's kind of weirdly more complex, but like as Lyra wields it, you kind of understand it a bit more. But it's almost like it's like a connection she has with it as well. Like as you kind of read through it.
Yeah, because like at first it doesn't work when she first like tries to use it, but then like it's learning between the two of them, between the compass and her, essentially. That's how I took it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all magical, Matt. This is fantasy. Then Lyra discovers that Coulter is actually the leader of the Gobblers, who are church-funded abductors of children so that they can perform experiments on them. Yeah. Lyra ends up fleeing to the Egyptians, the canal-faring nomads whose children have also been abducted. So the Egyptians form an expedition to the Arctic with Lyra to rescue the children. Lyra recruits Lorik Berenson, the armored bear, and his human aeronaut friend, Lee Scoresby, who is played by Lin-Manuel Miranda in
So
the TV
happy
show.
about that.
It's going to be so good. She also learns that Lord Asriel has been exiled, guarded by Vivers on Svalbard, near Bolvingar, the Gobbler research station. Lyra discovers an abandoned child who has been cut from his daemon, and in the world of his dark materials, daemons function kind of like witches' familiars. They're souls that are in animals, and they pair to a human, essentially. I don't know if you have a better description of them, Aaron.
I think it's a pretty good description, but I think the interesting part is like how the daemons mirror kids up until like I forget like exactly how they describe it within the books, but once they reach like, I don't want to say adulthood, but once they like, reach like some sort of like maturity, like 13, 14, the daemons can actually change shape or change animals. So they're constantly changing. Like kids are constantly changing as they grow and mature. So once they hit that like that maturing age, they stay in one form, and that's kind of like that's your daemon then kind of moving forward. So, and they have it kind of mirror. It's kind of cool. Like I love the way in the books where as you kind of learn about the daemons, you start to see other people around with daemons. So like you see the servants at Jordan College and how they've all got was it Labradors, Kate?
Yes.
The servants all have dogs, the Labradors. They all kind of stand to attention. So it's almost like you're able to see some of the daemon and be able to kind of like infer about their personality types or who they are and, you know, the jobs they serve.
Yeah, because Azrael has it's a snow leopard, right?
Yeah.
That thing is fierce.
Well, and then Miss Coulter has the I know they just always describe it as an orange monkey, so I don't know exactly what kind.
Is it a macaque? What's an orange monkey?
I'm going to point that question to Matt, who's the zoo expert.
Orangutan?
No, the little
like-
one.
Smaller, more agile,
Oh, the
screechier.
they actually just did something on this, and I don't remember what it's called.
But that monkey is terrifying.
That monkey is.
I remember reading it in the book and being like, God, that's awful.
It's a golden. It's a tamarin. That's what it is. It's a tamarin. I am looking at Earth and Worlds. 15 types of monkeys. But yeah, it's essentially like that monkey is conniving and just awful. And so essentially what happens is Lyra and the children end up getting rescued by Scoresby, Lorik, the Egyptians, and Seraphina Pakala's flying witch clan. So like they essentially like aeronauts. They have like these big kind of like zeppelin like if you saw the polar bear movie, it's like a big zeppelin thing that they fly around. And the end of this book essentially ends with Asriel, exiled from the church, going to research the dust and essentially like destroy it and destroy the source. And Lyra ends up taking up the quest to essentially stop Asriel and discover the purpose of it herself. At the end of the first book. And so like the book series really follows like that Joseph Campbell like hero's journey. Like she's born into greatness and then she hears the call and then she, you know, faces all these things. And then in The Subtle Knife, Lyra journeys through Asriel's opening between worlds to Sidagazi.
I'm gonna guess yes, because I think I think the translation for it is like sea. What was it? There's a translation for it, and it's like sea by the coast or something like that. I think that's what that means.
Okay. That's essentially this otherworldly city whose denizens have discovered a clean path between worlds at a far earlier point in time than the others in the storyline, which the easiest way to explain it's kind of like a Bifrost.
Yes.
That's like the easiest like context. And essentially like the Sidagazi's reckless use of technology has released soul-eating specters to which children are immune, and this has to do with the fact that children don't have dust around them, rendering much of the world incapable of transit by adults. And this is where Lyra ends up meeting Will Perry, who's a 12-year-old boy from our world, Lyra's world. And yeah, like essentially like this is where it gets really, really big. And this is when you get to see what's beyond everything else in this fantastical world, because in the first book, I would say like 99% of it is just this magical realism element where it all looks like our world. There are just pieces that are different and there are some things that are magical. And then when you go into The Subtle Knife, it's all freaking magical and it's all different, and it's where you really hit like almost this high fantasy bar versus like low fantasy or like this magical realist element to it.
Well, and it's interesting as well because like, so with The Subtle Knife, you start off with kind of like Will's story, and Will's story is set in our universe, and then he, you know, through some actions ends up hitting through a portal. I forget exactly how it works, but he kind of is like running away from these people who are chasing him, who are after his abandoned father's letters, I think it is, and he just kind of runs away, and like through some sort of back alley, he ends up in a completely different universe, and then all of a sudden that's kind of like the doorway for the story as well, that you suddenly go, okay, you're following Will like he's the narrator, and then you're just into these odd worlds where you're trying to figure out what is going on. Like, so you kind of like, it's almost like an RPG game, like as you're kind of going through and you're picking up pieces of evidence to try and figure it out along the way. So it was fun reading that story for the Subtle Knife.
And like one of the like really cool overarching factors and themes is this idea of like the church and the magisterium essentially working to control control the universe and control what people can see and control what people can experience. And that's something that like the first episode of the TV show like jumps into really quick. It establishes that like really, really well. And in The Amber Spyglass, which is the third book, that one focuses on like, this is the book where Lyra really pushes back against the church and pushes back against the magisterium, and ultimately ends up kidnapping her mother, or who she was kidnapped by her mother. And it's all about her kind of turning against it, and then you get to see her role in the prophecy. because essentially the way his dark materials works is it places Lyra in this role of Eve almost, because she is like I don't know how to describe it other than tropes, which is she's like this magical child essentially, and like the destiny of the world is
that destined child, like the kind of Harry Potter-esque, like, you know, has to be at the forefront of everything and kind of experience it all. So yeah, she's kind of the anointed one, which is, I guess, is kind of like a weird, you know, in the context of like how religion kind of plays such a strong role in this. It's kind of that, you know, parallel, I guess, to another well-known messiah that kind of walks the path.
Because there's even like a tempting that Lyra goes through. There's a temptation in the cave, which is like taken straight from like biblical literature, but it's all subverted. Like she doesn't, like, she faces temptation, but she never succumbs to it. Like Pullman, like the entire basis of all of Pullman's work is essentially saying that, not that sin doesn't exist, essentially saying that sin doesn't exist, and it's the actions that we choose as humans that inform everything. And there are actions that you can come back from, and there are actions that you can't come back from, and it isn't an overarching body that decides that. And that's like the entire purpose of it. And he introduces a god figure, which is essentially the authority. And this is kind of like the big bad in the end of the third book.
Oh, the third book just goes for it.
Yeah.
Like if this was a boxing match, it would be going for that killer knockout blow, and you're like, okay, you're plowing right into this. Like I didn't expect, for where the subtle knife finishes to where this starts, you're kind of like, oh, I didn't see this coming at all.
And it's one of those things too, is like, in a lot of the critiques from like religious people on this book, or on this book series, it's that, oh, it was okay in the first book, and then it was like, this is kind of bad, but I think he still might like us. So the third one was like, oh my god, he literally is like, wants God to be dead. And that's the trajectory of the 3 books in the franchise. And there's a lot of other stuff that happens. Like, I know that like there are some spoilers, but like there's so much more to this world that like I don't even classify them as spoilers, because holy crap. Like because growing up I read C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. I read Lord of the Rings. I lived in high fantasy for a lot of my childhood. And for some reason, and I don't know if it's because of the fact that Pullman tries to put humanity at the center, but like there's something just so grand and yet really real about his Dark Materials series, in a way that I don't feel like the other ones are. Because, and specifically Chronicles of Narnia, which Pullman hates being compared to, for obvious reasons, because C.S. Lewis. But that one never doesn't feel like a fantasy, whereas Pullman's work, like, very starkly addresses issues that are happening, or that have happened in the world, and in a very pointed and deliberate way that bridges this gap between fantasy and then, like, teaching morality and stuff like that.
Yeah, I definitely think like with a C.S. Lewis, like the Chronicles of Narnia, there's a very clear like separation. Like we went through the wardrobe and this is their world and we're in it. Mm-hmm. Whereas the Dark Materials, it's like, no, they're all connected. Everyone's connected. You've got, you know, Will from one universe. You've got Lyra. They go into other people's universe, and everything kind of is building towards this cataclysmic event where it's all connected. It all feels like it means something. Like just because you exist in one universe doesn't mean you are safe from this. And then a lot of those themes kind of continue to carry through. Like nowhere is safe from these organizations.
Yeah. And that's ultimately what this is. So like as we move into the book, why those Like we're like the first one is just fantasy, and what this contributes is fantasy, like any other genre, like science fiction, like horror, any of those things. Like they all provide elements of critique for our societies, but when you look at what Pullman has cited as his influences, it's very different. So Pullman identified three major literary influences on his Dark Materials. The essay on the Marionette Theater by Heinrich von Kleist, the works of William Blake, which, if you don't know who William Blake is, he is a poet who, if you were a goth emo kid, you probably knew, because there was a vampire series that used William Blake's, like, The Tiger and all that stuff, but he's a really good poet, really dark, horror, a lot of horror has elements in William Blake. And then most importantly, like I mentioned at the top, Paradise Lost. And it's in Paradise Lost that Pullman actually got the title for his series. So, and it's from this passage: "Into the wild abyss, the womb of nature, and perhaps her grave, of neither sea, nor shore, nor air, nor fire, but all these in their pregnant causes mixed, confusedly, and which thus must ever fight, unless the mighty maker them ordain his dark materials to create more worlds. Into the wild abyss the wire fiend stood on the brink of hell and looked a while, pondering his voyage, for no narrow frith he had to cross." And from that passage in Paradise Lost, that's really where Pullman sees his books. Like, he sees his books as being on the brink of hell because of how much he pushes back against a lot of, like, these established ideas. But it's just, like, a really cool thing, because, like...
I was going to say, there's even some direct links there to something that happens later on in the Amber Spyglass as well.
Yeah. It's a lot. There's so much.
So many details.
And it's weird because when you think of fantasy, and especially when you think of, like, the fantasy canon, everybody and their work has somehow been cited as being influenced by Tolkien, or somehow has been cited as being influenced by Chronicles of Narnia and that kind of stuff. But the funny thing is when critics compared his Pullman's trilogy to the Chronicles of Narnia, Pullman said that the Narnia series was blatantly racist, monumentally disparaging of women, immoral, and evil.
It's not far off base.
So yeah, and if you're listening and you grew up Catholic or you grew up Christian, this is the cornerstone of your family, or of your fantasy most of the time, is C.S. Lewis. And the Chronicles, which I love them, they're great. But then when you get older and you read them back, you're like, oh, you didn't even try to hide that this was old Jesus.
When you read those when you're older and you're like, oh, this is awkward. Oh, how did I not see this?
Yep.
Like,
That is probably the one fantasy series that I read. I reread The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and I think Prince Caspian's the second one. I reread the first two, like, right when I started college, and I was like, I'm going to put these down and preserve the memory in my mind. I can't do this right now. It's a lot.
Well, and that's kind of what the cool thing was, like, when you pick up, like, his Dark Materials and kind of read through the trilogy of books, like, he doesn't sugarcoat it. I mean, he goes after the church, but he also finds a way to incorporate religion and science, and, like, I don't think I've ever seen a trilogy of books really aggressively tackle the subject kind of like he does.
Yeah.
There's no one that really, like, that you can think of when you think of, like, classic storytelling or, like, very, popular books that really went after it in a way, and again, married that something that is so real to our world, but then layering in this fantasy and, the mythology and everything like that. So it's something so unique.
And it's also the fact that, like, as much as it's fantasy, like you said, like, he straight up calls it the church. Like, it's not like this disambiguation of this thing that might be the church. It's like, no, the church is stealing kids. the church is controlling all sources of knowledge, and you will be exiled for heresy or killed. Like, that is...
Well, and then again, like you talked about, like they're looking to abolish like original sin, like find the source of original sin and like eradicate it. Like there's so many things that he just like pulls straight from our actual reality that exist, and like kind of like, no, I'm going into this. You buckle up. We're tackling this subject.
And like, and the other thing is too is like, in order to be a scholar, like you essentially have to like seek this. You have to be deemed by the church and the magisterium to be a scholar. Like, you have to seek that designation, and if you don't, you are a heretic. And that knowledge has to happen in those spaces with those people, and only those people. Like, you can't share it with anybody. You can't do anything like that. And so it really harkens back, and it still happens now, where like you have religious authorities dictating what is seen as knowledge, especially when it comes to science, which is the basis of this entire book. Which, while it may be magic, a lot of it is about finding these different discoveries, almost like scientific discoveries, and being told, no, they're not there. The church deems this as not being there. And then it's like, no, I see it right there. It's there. And it's just really good. But
it's kind of interesting how they set it all up as well, because like, I mean, you kind of touched on it at the top of the show, but like, I think that the show handled this, the new show on HBO handled this really well. It's kind of like, it's like our world, but it's not.
Yeah.
Like, and that's your kind of basis. Like, okay, it's slightly, some things have been slightly twisted. Like, you know, from there, like the church is still has a power and control over society.
And this goes into like the fact, another piece of the fantasy, like almost all fantasy books, there's an entire like language within the book series where essentially Pullman renames various common objects or ideas of our world, but he reduces them to their most archaic, not descriptions, but like they're the most archaic forms of that word, like what that word was like when that word originated versus what we call it right now. And he does that to show, like what Aaron said, like this difference in the world, while still giving the right idea. Because you'll hear it and you'll think, oh yeah, that's the thing, and you realize that it's a description for something that you already know. And if you're one of our Patreon supporters, I will include that list of all of those words in our show notes for you to look at, because it's actually really, really fun. And of course, like we talked about, the demons, which is Daemons, not Demons. Essentially, in our world, the world of Lyra, they're essentially like a individual's inner self, and it manifests itself as an animal-shaped demon that always is near to the human counterpart. And as Aaron explained earlier, that animal changes until they reach that certain like coming of age piece. And that's like one of the other important things, and one of the interesting things that there is such a wide audience for his Dark Materials, is that like this is ultimately a coming of age story for both Will and Lyra. And it's something in the same way that like Harry Potter almost is. And that ultimately, with all the other stuff we talked about, leads to censure. Because these book series have been censored a lot. Specifically in the US. So the biggest change in the US version of the book occurred in chapter 33, and it concerns a paragraph detailing Lyra's sexual awakening. And I believe this is the second one? I believe it's the second one. Second or the third one. I didn't put the name. But essentially what happens is both the UK and the US versions begin with, as Mary said, that Lyra felt something strange happening to her body. What follows in the UK version includes Lyra's physiological reactions. Her breathing quickens, she feels a stirring in the roots of her hair, and sensations in her breast. The US version cuts out these sentences entirely and picks up again with a reference to Lyra feeling as if she's been handed a key to the house. Big difference.
Yeah, really doesn't get the point across. I think that might be the. Is that the? It's so hard to delicately balance the story, but I think is that the amber spyglass.
It is. I think it is the third one.
Yeah, because I think it's near the end.
And essentially, the people who adapted it to the U.S. never really addressed the changes. But essentially, the working consensus is that these were deemed as children's books, and so they were shown as not appropriate for a character who was 1, under 18, or 2, for readers under 18. Yeah, and with that censure came, I believe that there are some iterations where there is some censure with some of the anti-Catholic sentiment, because it's very anti-Catholic, and ultimately it's anti. Okay. It's anti-organizational religion, but the Catholic took the most offense because he models the entire system of the church and the magisterium on the Catholic Church and how it operates between Vatican and armed pieces. So, like, yeah, it's anti-Catholic, anti-Christian, and this is like, I'm using these words as about why though, not because I believe them, but because that is how people have framed the book, and it has caused a lot of the controversy around the book series as well as the movie. And so I'm going to get into a little bit of describing it. Cynthia Grenier, who wrote in Catholic Culture, in the world of Pullman, God himself, the authority, is a merciless tyrant. His church is an instrument of oppression, and true heroism consists of overthrowing both. Then William A. Donahue of the Catholic League described Pullman's trilogy as atheism for kids.
Oh,
God. Yeah. And all I can think of is, like, and I apologize if we have any Catholic listeners or Christian listeners, but the Old Testament God's not nice.
He is a merciless tyrant.
He smite you.
He smite everything. Look back, smite.
Yeah, but that's why they wrote the New Testament, so they could feel better about all the killings.
Yeah. Firstborn sons, all that, not a tyrant at all.
We don't mention that one.
But anyway, so that is some of the commentary. Specifically, the atheism for kids comment is what, if you look up like a lot of the articles or like fun facts about his Dark Materials, the atheism for kids comment comes up a lot, and it's actually something that like fans have taken back. They're like, oh, do you want to teach your kids that you can be a good person without structures? Try atheism for kids in his Dark Materials. Half of it's jokingly, but the other half is just like, at the end of the day, like, his Dark Materials is a moral tale, and it's a tale about existing beyond the control of something and still maintaining that moral value system, which is something that Lyra not only struggles to keep north, but it's something that she overcomes and she succumbs to, you know, sometimes as well, which is really good because you see, like, Lyra doesn't succeed all the time. Like, the end of the second book is literally her being kidnapped. Like, she fails, but she keeps going, which is something that is also one of, like, my favorite parts of the series. And in response to a lot of the critiques of his series, Pullman expressed surprise over what he considered to be a relatively low level of criticism for his Dark Materials on religious grounds, saying, "I've been surprised by how little criticism I've got. Harry Potter's been taking all the flack. Meanwhile, I've been flying under the radar, saying that are far more subversive than anything poor old Harry has ever said. My books are about killing God."
Wow.
Which, to be fair, when you think of books getting, like, banned, it's Harry Potter, because witchcraft. Even though Harry Potter is an entire Messiah narrative.
People be crazy.
But Mr. Pullman, if you're listening to this, my Catholic school banned you. So there you go. Yeah, so while others support this interpretation, arguing that the series, while clearly anti-clerical, is also anti-theological because of the death of God is represented as fundamentally an important question. The weird thing is that he actually did find support among Christians as well. Most notably, Rowan Williams, who is the former Archbishop of Canterbury, which is the Anglican Church. And the Archbishop of Canterbury argued that Pullman's attacks focus on the constraints and dangers of dogmatism and the use of religion to oppress, not Christianity itself. Williams also recommended the His Dark Materials series of books for inclusion and discussion in religious education classes, and stated that to see large school parties in the audience of Pullman plays at the National Theater is vastly encouraging. And ultimately, Pulliam and Williams took part in a National Theater platform debate a few days later to discuss myth, religious experience, and representation of it in the arts. And then ultimately, the books are very anti-religion, and anti-religion in the way that it, like I've already said multiple times, as it forms structures on us. All of this kind of culminates in like my favorite quote from Pullman on this, is that, in my view, belief in God seems to be a very good excuse on the part of those who claim to believe for doing many wicked things that they wouldn't feel justified doing without such a belief. Beyond that, in numerous speeches, Pullman, who has described himself alternatively as an atheist and as an agnostic atheist, which those terms go against each other, but whatever, that's how he described himself.
I was going to say that's...
it doesn't work that way.
It's like oil and water, like you're one or the other.
Yes.
That's agnostic atheist.
It don't work.
That's like nearly fightless.
That just means you're gliding.
So he essentially maintains that the books are more about the dangers of rigid theological doctrines and institutions than they are anti-God or anti-faith. He also argues that his books are a testament to storytelling's ability to impart morals to children. Thou shalt, and this is his words, thou shalt not might reach the head, but it takes once upon a time to reach the heart. And he wrote that in a column about his book. And ultimately, because of all of this, the Golden Compass / Northern Lights became the number 8 on the top 100 banned books lists from 2000 to 2009.
It's interesting that that one reached number 8 as opposed to the Amber Spyglass.
Well, I think it's the whole series, actually. It might be that. Let me double check. Yeah, it's the whole series. Okay. So, of the top 100 banned or challenged books from 2000 to 2009, number 8 is His Dark Materials series by Phillip Pullman. Number 1 is Harry Potter.
What's number 2?
How?
Alice by Phyllis Reynolds Naylor. The 3rd is The Chocolate World. 4 is And a Tango Takes 3. 5 is Of Mice and Men.
They don't like what they do to Lenny.
Yeah. 6 is I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings from Maya Angelou. That one is actually really freaking disheartening. Scary Stories, which we talked about in our Scary Stories episode, is number 7. And then you have ETYLTTFM Later Gator series by Lauren Miracle. And then The Perks of Being a Wallflower round out the top 10.
I didn't expect that to be top 10.
It's a very weird top 10.
Is it?
No, that's fair. And I can guarantee that most of these are because of same-sex relationships, because I think that's what we found out on our Scary Stories episode. We went through, like, why, and Harry Potter was witchcraft and Satanism. And, like, the other top 5 were that. But yeah, all of that is to say, people go against books for a lot of different reasons, but it's usually a religious reason, or not age appropriate. And I'm using bunny quotes for not age appropriate.
Which
All that
excuse me,
being
also
said-
just
What?
is also just basically how they wrap around not having to say religious reasons.
Yes. Pretty much. Yeah. But the cool thing is even with all of this controversy, the book series did win a lot of awards. So the first volume, Northern Lights, won the Carnegie Medal for Children's Fiction in the UK in 1995. And in 2007, the judges of the Carnegie Medal for Children's Literature selected The Northern Lights as one of the 10 most important children's novels of the previous 70 years. And in June 2007, it was voted in an online poll as the best Carnegie Medal winner in the 70-year history of the award, the Carnegie of Carnegies, which is a very freaking high honor to have, especially from like a public perspective and not like a people in bow ties perspective. The Amber Spyglass won 2001 Whitbread Book of the Year award, the first time that such an award has been bestowed on a book from their children's literature category.
I'm not gonna lie, I really thought that said white bread the first two times I
did
read that.
too. I tried not to say it. The trilogy came third in 2003 BBC's Big Red, a national poll of viewers' favorite books after The Lord of the Rings and Pride and Prejudice. Which those are two very British books, are they not?
Yes, very. I have bad memories of them.
At the time, only his Dark so at the time that the trilogy came in third for the 2003's BBC's Big Red, only his Dark Materials and Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, amongst the top 5 works, lacked screen adaptations. Everything else had been adapted before. That doesn't exist anymore because everything gets adapted now.
For better or for worse.
This podcast I heard is being adapted right now.
Yeah, I mean, for better or for worse.
It'll be on Hulu.
That's the better. Hulu has good content. Just nobody ever knows that it's there. Like our podcast.
Yeah.
For better or for worse.
So in May of 2005, Pullman attended the British Library in London to receive a formal congratulations for his work from Cultural Secretary Tessa Joel.
It says on behalf of the government.
Tessa
That's more the
Joel?
interesting part.
Yes,
They
on
had a
behalf of
government then.
Yeah, Tessa Joel. I don't know how to say her name.
Joel.
Tessa
Probably.
Joel. Why is there a random W? Tessa Joel on behalf of the government. Okay. Later that same month in May of 2005, Pullman received the Swedish government's Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award for children's and youth literature, sharing it with Japanese illustrator Ryoji Arai. Swedes regard this prize as second only to the Nobel Prize in Literature, and it comes with a value of 5 million Swedish kroner, which is approximately 385,000 euros. And in 2008, The Observer cites Northern Lights as one of the 100 best novels. Time magazine in the US included The Northern Lights / The Golden Compass in the list of the 100 best young adult novels of all time. People love it.
For good reason.
So there are also different iterations of it, so different adaptations of it. BBC Radio 4 broadcasted a radio play adaptation of his Dark Materials in 3 episodes that each lasted 2.5 hours, that were first broadcast in 2003 and then rebroadcasted in 2008, 2009, and in 2017, and was released by the BBC on CD and cassette. The cast included Terence Stamp as Lord Asriel and Lulu Popplewell as Lyra.
I have not heard the broadcast. No, I didn't. It's tough because when I was younger, 2003, I would have been 18. 18? I'm trying to think now. Doing mental math. Yeah, I was about 18, so I was not around the house much. I was out discovering things in the local town. But it's one of those weird things that, like, some of the connotations for kind of like a BBC Radio 4 was like, oh, it's an old people's station. with some of these kind of like dramatic readings, which is funny now because of how culture's moved, and I like things like podcasts and things like that. Like one of the things I discovered within the last year was like the Wolverine podcast, and I love it, and it's fascinating. And I actually think back, like they've been doing this stuff for years, like decades even, like on the radio, these dramatic retellings of stories, and I'm like, it's funny how some of it still continues to cycle round and kind of become popular again. Because I think Marvel's getting into a little bit more of that with those podcasts. People are obviously doing podcast retellings all the time with Serial and things like that. So it's funny that we kind of joke about it, but it does seem to kind of cycle back around every now and again.
Yeah, I mean, because like in the States, we pretty much like NPR was just what old people listen to in the car, but like it's just podcasts.
Yeah,
it's pretty much podcasts. And NPR made an entire podcast network of all of their shows that they do. So off of that and into the theater, which is another way to get mentally stimulated. So Nicholas Heitner directed a theatrical version of the books as a 2-part 6-hour performance for London's Royal National Theatre in December of 2003, running until March 2004. It starred Anna Maxwell Martin as Lyra, Dominic Cooper as Will, Timothy Dalton as Lord Asriel, and Patricia Hodge as Mrs. Coulter, with demon puppets designed by Michael Curry. The play was enormously successful and was revived with a different cast and a revised script for a second run between November of 2004 and April of 2005. It has since been staged by several other theaters in the UK and elsewhere. And a new production was staged at the Birmingham Repertory Theatre in March and April of 2009, directed by Rachel Kavanagh and Sarah Estill, and starring Amy McAllister as Lyra. This version toured the UK and included a performance in Pullman's hometown of Oxford. Pullman made a cameo appearance, much to the delight of the audience and the Oxford media, and the production finished up at West Yorkshire Playhouse in June 2009. People loved it.
That's a hell of a cast, by the way, for the original theatre.
Also, Timothy Dalton as Lord Asriel is actually a really good casting.
That is phenomenal casting, because he definitely has that that delivery, especially
that,
for Lord Asriel. Like, yes.
Yeah. No, I mean James McAvoy's great, but like Timothy Dalton. Okay. And then this all brings us to the movie known as The Golden Compass.
Oh no.
Of which the filmmakers obscured an explicitly biblical character of the authority to avoid offending the viewers. Waits, who is a part of the production, declared that he would not do the same for planned sequels, whereas The Golden Compass had to be introduced to the public carefully. He said the religious themes in the second and third books can't be minimized without destroying the spirit of these books. I will not be involved with any watering down books 2 or 3, since what I have been working towards this whole time in the first film was to be able to deliver the second and third act.
Yeah, but they don't realize in movies, if you do terrible in the first one, you don't get a second and third one.
Yeah, which is funny because like there was an article I think from Vanity Fair, and they were like, how his Dark Materials learned from the movie, and I was like, yeah, they just said F the Vatican and did what they wanted. Because the funniest thing,
it was a really good line.
Like the funniest thing in all of this is the Golden Compass movie, which had a packed cast, by the way.
Yes,
it had Daniel Craig, Eva Green, Nicole Kidman,
yeah.
Like it was stacked. It essentially
Freddie Highmore's in it.
Yeah.
Ian McKellen.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Like it had everything to succeed, and it bombed. And essentially, a lot of that came from the way they mismanaged the narrative and paced it. And because I know that they said that this movie was just supposed to be the first book, but I remember pieces of the second book that got really watered down and like brought into the first movie, or brought into this movie, if I remember correctly. And ultimately, their goal was to not offend anybody. But then in the official Vatican newspaper called Le Osservatore Romano, They said, in Pullman's world, hope simply does not exist. Because there is no salvation, but only personal, individualistic capacity to control the situation and dominate events. They didn't like it. And a whole bunch of Catholic groups in the United States actually called for a boycott of the film. And then you also the people who and the boycott they did because they feared that even a diluted version of the book would draw people to the best-selling trilogy and then teach children atheism.
God. Oh God. I would be more afraid that seeing the movie would put people off reading the books.
Yeah.
That would be the reverse way. Like if I was them, like, go see the movie, it's terrible. You won't want to read the books. And I was so sad and so disappointed because, like you said, it had a stacked cast, and I was really excited because I love like Ian McShane, Ian McKellen, and then like I was a big fan of Daniel Craig. Like still am. I love Daniel Craig. He's actually from Liverpool as well. So I was like, oh, this will be amazing. I'm so excited. Like I think seeing him as like Lord Asriel, I could see it. Yeah. Like he has the attributes to make a great Asriel, and I still think he did. I think he did quite well, but unfortunately, it's so condensed with all this information, and it doesn't really give the time of anything to settle and breathe. And then the girl who played Lyra, for me personally, being English, it was so hard to get past the accent. Like it was so heavily overplayed. It was very difficult to get past. And I think even how they portrayed a character, because like in the books, and Kate, you'll probably remember this, that Lyra is very creative and she kind of like weaves these like stories. But the way they chose to portray her within the movie was almost like she was just a liar.
Yeah.
She just lied about certain things. And it felt like it really undercut what her character was and how she was so intelligent and things like that. And she just kind of came across a little nasty in ways. And it wasn't endearing to the kind of character you would have gotten used to had you read the books.
Yeah, she comes off like really bratty almost too, and it's more about like so for me reading the books and I get this in Daphne Keene's rendition of Lyra is super intelligent and curious, and because
she's adventurous.
Yes. Like, she wants to keep moving, and she wants to keep learning, and she wants to build worlds, and she wants to learn more. And there's a, like, fire in her.
Yeah, it's almost like she's looking for a challenge.
Yes.
Like, she's outgrown the world around her, and she's creating and fabricating this, like, world of adventure, and she's trying to tackle it head on. And she's very, like, confident and outgoing, and it's again, like you said, Daphne Keene does a fantastic job of capturing that, and I just don't feel like in the movie they ever really.
Oh yeah, in the
got
movie,
that. Like
in the movie, she's like really cold, like mean is probably.
She's almost like
she
comes across very entitled.
Yeah.
Very spoiled.
Yeah, which is probably one of like the biggest missteps of the movie for me. There was nothing about her that I really liked.
No, and that's the linchpin of the movie. Everything kind of centers around Lyra. Like, if you can't set Lyra up and her world, then all those relationships just fall apart because they just don't feel believable. And then you, like Matt said, if you don't do well in that first movie, you can never make it to a second because, again, it's all dependent on Lyra, who then builds that relationship with Will in the later stories.
Mm-hmm.
So, I was gonna say, when this came out, obviously I'd never actually finished this movie. I've actually like tried, just never cared. It's been one of those, when this came out, I remember being excited for it because I knew it was a series that I did not know, obviously, as you've learned from this episode. But it obviously coming off The Lord of the Rings, I was like, this is supposed to be a new trilogy. It's everything else. And then obviously between everything I saw of it and everything, I was like, well, this is, and then like I said, I've tried to watch it and I was like, I don't really care for this too much.
I wanted to like it so much. I was so happy I was surprised. I admit I was very surprised they'd adapted it. I was like, oh, this looks great, and went into it. And I wanted to like it so much, even coming out like trying to justify certain elements of it. And I still, again, I liked some of the way they kind of like tried to build out the initial world when they first come into it, and like the visuals of it, I was like, wow, this is really cool. And again,
There's
like
that
seeing
scene
Lord
where Lyra
Asriel.
walks into the polar bears area, and it's the opening of the door with like 4
Yeah.
polar bears behind her. It's beautiful. Like the
Yeah.
set is beautiful, but it doesn't work.
I know.
Makes me so sad because like Eva Green is actually phenomenal. Like Eva Green like is like the main witch in the movie. Like she's so good, and it's It
I actually thought they did the polar bears pretty well as well.
They did.
I
They
didn't
really
didn't
did.
mind the polar bears so much, but there was just I remember getting to the end and was just like, they absolutely sped through that. Like there was so much detail. Like I almost felt sorry for people around me that like hadn't read the books and was like, but there's so much good detail there, and you're not extracting it all out. And I think it's funny because this movie made me feel like, for the first time in a long time, having read books and kind of seen adaptations, that maybe movie telling is almost disadvantaged when trying to adapt a book, because there's not the time to draw out and build what you need to build.
So I thought you were going to go a different way of going, this is the first time I saw how America basically will dilute something if it goes against the religious stuff.
No, so kind of related, but not really. The first time I got to experience my brother's first time of being crushed by a movie adaptation, it was Percy Jackson, because that was his favorite book series, and they changed so much.
I'm still sad because it is better, and there's a better premise and everything than Harry Potter.
It was, yes. I love Harry Potter, but it was different.
I mean, the first movie's not bad, but the second movie's terrible.
Yeah.
Which led to another thing of, like, you have to do good to get the third movie.
You have to have people on set who make decisions and care and understand.
Well, because it's also one of those things of like the girl who played Lyra was like a child actress. Like somebody on set should have told her, "Don't act like a brat. Act like you're a curious adventurer."
Yeah, like tone it down. She was almost felt like she almost like projected her voice. Like she tried to come up with confidence, and she just felt like she was shouting at people.
Yes!
And like
It was like confidence is loud. Could have been one of those things. Is like there are child actors who, and I think this and as a horror fan, like this happens a lot. Like you get child actors who get put on screen with like a really good actor, and they either rise to the occasion just by being themselves, or they completely just flop it because they like see what the older actor is doing, and they're trying to be that like loud, confident like person versus like at Fantastic Fest for Jojo Rabbit, Taika Waititi said that he prefers to work with child actors because most of the time a good child actor, they're not acting, they're just being them, and they're just being a kid versus like an adult who is like, and now I'm gonna walk over here, but I have a German accent in my head. Like that was the example that like he gave, and it makes sense. But it also points out why I think Lyra fails in this movie, and why I don't like I try to avoid movies with kids. But every now and then, like especially like this year, I've been hit with a lot of movies that have child stars, and I'm like, okay, you brought it. This was good.
Well, that's the thing. If it's done right and it's done well, it really is impactful, because you can kind of like, you have that nostalgic callback. And you're like, I remember feeling like that. I remember doing something crazy like that. And it's just relatable. Like you could always call back to your own childhood if it's done well. But this one was not done well. Do you know what the worst part? I just had a hard time believing that she was a kid. Like the way she acted, I'm like, no one acts like that. She's not really a kid. It's like I just couldn't buy it. I just couldn't get past it.
All right, so now that we've done basically ripped this movie apart again, let's move on to the last part. Get out of
Yeah,
here.
because that movie has a 42 on Rotten Tomatoes from critics and a 51 audience score, so safe to say
It's
people
pretty
agree
generous,
with
to
us.
be fair.
I think it was the polar bears.
If it wasn't for the polar bears, the score would be a lot lower.
So the TV show titled His Dark Materials, which is going to be 2 seasons, and the second season got renewed, or the show itself got renewed for a second season before the premiere even aired. And a lot of that was done because the actors were so young. They had to, like, we need them to be this age when we record this, so we have to go now. And the HBO and the BBC essentially just backing that play. I need to find it specifically, but it's either the BBC or HBO's most expensive series ever made. I think it's BBC.
Well, BBC is
Probably.
Planet Earth, I believe, or was at one time.
Because something said HBO, but then I'm also like, that doesn't seem right because HBO has Game of Thrones.
I thought I was going to say I thought the second season of Westworld took that title
Oh yeah.
as being one of the most expensive.
It's
It's the
BBC.
BBC.
It's the BBC.
Yes.
Yeah. So His Dark Materials is the most expensive BBC production.
I think had it not been for the involvement of HBO, I don't know if BBC would have felt as confident going into this.
Yeah.
So it's probably why they took the risk knowing it was being co-financed, co-produced.
And it's filling that fantastical hole that Game of Thrones left. In
Yes.
like a very different way, but a same like storytelling way. Yeah, so it's BBC's most expensive show. I'm so mad that it premieres in the UK on Sundays, but it premieres.
Well,
in the
now you know how the UK feels with Game of Thrones, because we would get it on Sunday, and it's same with Watchmen actually. So we get it on Sunday, and they don't get it till the day after. So it's
okay.
interestingly reversed for once. So they're probably like, yes, the one and only time this will happen.
That's fine. But
That's the only reason I moved to the US, just to get all this stuff earlier.
But what about Star Wars though? One of our UK based writer gets to see it like a full day ahead of everybody else.
Yeah, it's something to do with release dates. Like their release dates are on like Wednesdays instead of Thursday. It's just like the
Yeah,
accepted
UK
day.
usually gets about a day early for a lot of movies.
So
They're
weird.
in the future, goddamn them.
It's from all them years where they got it 2 months later.
I remember those days. You'd have someone, like, you'd have friends who go to Florida, and they'd be like, I just saw this amazing... Funnily enough, it was Austin Powers, but they're like, I just saw this amazing movie called Austin Powers, and, like, telling me all about it, and then it didn't come to, like, cinemas until, like, 6-8 months later, and you're like, oh, I heard about this, and, yeah, back in the Stone Age.
Oh, that being said, it is, as we said, co-produced by HBO, and HBO is distributing it internationally, so that's what we watch it through. And it stars Daphne King as Lyra, James McAvoy as Lord Asriel, Lin-Manuel Miranda as Scoresby. And the series received its premiere in London on October 15th. And broadcast began on BBC One in the United Kingdom November 3rd, so this past weekend. And HBO got it November 4th. And yeah.
It was brilliant.
What did you think about the first episode? Like adaptation-wise, acting-wise?
So you and I were live tweeting because we just couldn't help ourselves. I was just really impressed. Like, again, Daphne Keane was she was such a relatable character as far as Lyra. And again, I liked how when she was adventuring around, they gave her the time and breath to kind of like run and have that story, so you can build out like how big the college was and like her running across the rooftops, and you kind of like have that relationship. And again, you build on that like creativeness of like, you know, how her and Roger kind of chase each other around, and it was really good. I really enjoyed it, and then I still felt like they pulled back enough that they still left the audience with a lot of questions. Like, I know a few people in our group are kind of talking about it, like, well, what is all this stuff? Like, why do they have animals? And, you know, like, what's this dust stuff? And I'm like, dude, just give it time, it works itself through. So, yeah, no, I was really impressed and really happy with it, and I'm glad it had a good pace about it, which again was my number one complaint with the movie. It felt too fast and they crammed it in. So I'm happy they're just kind of like letting it breathe a bit and kind of like building upon the introduction of it all. Yeah. So, how did you feel?
I loved it. Shit, I gave it a 10 out of 10. There was such scale to it. So I think that deciding to have the first time we see Daphne as Lyra, being her playing with Roger and running through the halls and seeing how small she is in comparison to Jordan College and how adventurous she is. Like, while Roger is taking the stairs, she's jumping off of them, and like she really defines herself in those moments as that little adventurer. And one of the things that I don't like in fantasy, sci-fi, horror, any of it, I don't like it when I'm told the rules of the world. I don't like it when I'm by characters, right? I don't like exposition has to be done well. And what I liked for episode 1 is episode 1 just starts with title cards explain this, slowly lowering you, like you're in your world, and then the title cards slowly lower you into what his dark materials is, and then that's it. You don't get explained anything else. You just get dropped into the world, and they start talking about dust and demons, and Lyra takes a swig of wine or something, and like it just goes straight into it. And that for me was when I knew I was gonna like it, in like that first 30 minutes, because it was focused on delivering us characters and experiences, and it wasn't talking down to the audience, and it wasn't over explaining to the audience. And I think that a lot of that has to do with it being from the BBC, because at the end of the day, it is produced for a British audience. It is produced for an English audience, for people who have grown up with these books and obviously like rate it like the top book ever, the top book series ever. So they're like, I think had it come out of the US for a US audience, I think we would have seen a lot more exposition versus understanding that like, oh, this is a part of the culture. We all kind of can reference these things. We're just going to drop you into it, which I really liked.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to do it sometimes. Just like don't treat the audience members like they're idiots. Like they'll get it. Just give them time and let the story build. And there's something sometimes the intrigue and the mystery around certain things that kind of like pulls people in. Like you'll either kind of like see it and be like, okay, I want to know more, or sometimes these kind of stories just aren't for you, and people just like, I don't really get it. Like, or sometimes you just need a couple of those episodes to kind of really get into it and kind of make that decision. But yeah, they really didn't hold back as well. And I loved how when they did show McAvoy being Azrael, they kind of really leaned into kind of like how cold he is. Like you see that one scene with Roger, and he's like, she's special. And he goes, everyone's special. And you're like, oh, damn. Oh, it's supposed to be his uncle, like her uncle. And you're like, oh.
It's so good. So what are one of the things what's something that you're excited to see?
I love the fact that this is on weekly, because it drives a conversation online, kind of like what Watchmen
I don't
does.
want to talk to people online. They suck.
Well, I'll talk to them for you, man.
Yes, we'll talk, Aaron, because I enjoy that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Every time I talk to people online about things, then I don't want to watch it anymore.
See, that's why I like to do the podcast, because I love the engagement. Like, I can talk about this stuff all day, every day. It's so fun. And then seeing how different people engage with it and connect with it, and different points they pull up, because that's what everyone has, a different perspective they bring to it. So I always like that uniqueness that of a good story, you can see so many different elements come out of it. And I think his Dark Materials definitely touches on so many different things. But as far as what I'm excited about, is it's so hard to say, but like seeing those relationships build with like Lee Scoresby and I always butcher his name, but Eric, why can't I think of his name? The polar bear and things like that, because the polar bear and Lyra do form this great relationship, and then like her and Will and things like that. But then ultimately, there's also that like other side that, as hopeful as the relationships are, they you know, there's always misery around the corner.
Yeah.
It's so sad.
My main thing is I'm just hoping they go full, like, balls to the wall, like, we're doing this. Because it's easy for the first book. I want, like,
Yes.
when the second and third come into play, I want it to be, like, I want them to go hard, which I think they will, because they went hard that first episode. So.
Yeah, definitely. Because once you get into any kind of story from the Subtle Knife and the Amber Spy, I mean, it gets so weird. Like, I want to talk about it. It's so weird. Especially when you get into the Amber Spyglass. I mean, they really went full tilt on it. I'm going to be curious to see how they address all of that. Because you know there's going to be discussion. There's going to be a narrative. And that's what I always found interesting, is it just gets people talking about it.
Yeah.
Like the fact that like people say it's like anti-organizational and kind of like anti-Christian and things like that. But like I always think it starts the conversation and it has people talking in a theological sense. Like especially with where this one will lead. And discussions are good for this kind of thing. Like, one of the most interesting classes I took was a religious studies class, and it was more from a theological aspect where you kind of discuss, like, you know, God is perfect. Well, what does that mean? And just kind of going through it and having these long formed kind of discussions and debates about it. I mean, that's what a lot of Judaism is based around, the rabbis discussing and interpretations and perspectives and on any kind of the religious texts and things like that. So yeah, I'm excited to see what everyone else will make of this as it moves on.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well,
when the season ends, we can all come back and do a recap show, and we can all discuss it then.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have to talk with idiots online.
I'm gonna hold you to that though. That'd be real fun.
Hold me or him?
You, Matt, because
Oh.
I'm sure Aaron, all I had to do was say, "Hey, Aaron, you want to come talk his Dark Materials?" And Aaron was like, "Here are my available times. Can we make this happen?"
I don't mind doing recaps of shows. It's trying to get everybody else to show up, record, get it
I'm
edited,
watching it
and
weekly,
every day.
So
I said I just don't like weekly thing because I don't have time for that.
it's only
I don't
8
sleep.
episodes.
That's what I'm
so
saying.
in
I
2
can do
months
that
it'll
at
be
night. I mean, I can start at 7, be done by 4. I'm good.
good. But yeah, so I guess with everything you talked about is, why does his Dark Materials matter for you? This will be our final thoughts on it.
There's just so many good elements. Like, it's just a book you can kind of keep coming back to, in different symbolism, and like even just the way they describe family. Like, family is constantly portrayed differently. Like when you have like the likes of the Egyptians, it's just got so many good messages, and I just love the depth of the story. And again, Pullman really just dove into this and addressed all kinds of topics that just really have stuck with me for a long time.
Yeah. It's my final thought. Or Matt, you want to go for your final thoughts?
I mean, it was nice learning about it. I kind of knew about the series, obviously. I guess, obviously, when these books come out would be not a time of me read. When did these books? When were we on?
1995 to 2007.
Yeah, well, it says 95, 97, 2000. Yeah, obviously they came out in a time when don't really, and where I grew up, obviously these books are definitely probably banned. I couldn't even get science books where I come from, let alone this. But no, so I mean, I knew it existed. Like I said, obviously, I tried watching The Golden Compass about it, and I was kind of excited when it was announced because I kind of knew about it. But over that, like as in like, you know, like, oh, this is a trilogy, etc. And then that sucked, and then just kind of never bothered to read the books, as we've been through at this point of, I'm not Adrian of I hate books, but I just didn't read those books. But no, I did know when the TV show was coming, I was saying, and I probably will eventually watch it, I just do not like watching things weekly anymore. I gave that up about 15 years ago, or whatever. Netflix came along, and I'm not going back. So you cable 2.0 people can go away.
I think I've said all I had to say about his Dark Materials. I love it. I love the investigation that puts into how everything plays in our world and power structures, and it does it in a way by building a. I love Lord of the Rings. Tolkien is like my Bible is J.R.R. Tolkien's world. The Silmarillion, The Hobbit, the Lord of the Rings, like everything. That being said, at this point, I have seen so many iterations of that material with those creatures doing those things, and his dark materials is something that is so drastically different and yet still extreme fantasy that I think that it is going to get a lot of people into the genre in a different way and to see more of what the genre of fantasy has to offer. So yeah, that's what I'm excited
Good.
for.
And don't forget atheism for kids. That's great.
Yes, atheism for kids.
Printed on the pamphlet. We're good.
But yeah, thank you again for coming on, Aaron.
Thank you.
Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you on the interwebs, where they can find your podcast, where they can listen to you?
Oh God, I've got to remember details now. All right, well, you can find me. I'm majority of my time is spent heavily on Twitter at BritishCPA. We also do a lot of stuff at Nerds Social Club on Twitter as well. So we're always looking for trailers and news articles, and just in general, we're just always there for engagement and discussion. We love talking about anything and everything to do with fandom. So I will always be available on there. And I also do some fun comic reviews on But Why Those sites, so go read those.
Yeah. And his comic reviews are really great.
Ah.
Yeah. You always do your formatting.
Yeah.
I don't read comics, so.
Yeah, and as always, you can find the podcast at But Why Though PC on all of your social media, but specifically Twitter. It's where we're most active. You can also find our Patreon if you want to support us a little bit more and throw like $1 our way at patreon.com/ButWhyThePC. And you can find me on Twitter at OhMyMythRandier. And Adrian has not talked for the rest of this episode, as I'm sure you noticed. He had an emergency he had to go attend to, so he had to leave in the middle of the episode. But he is here in spirit and or Discord chatting. So, Matt, where can they find you?